5:58 a.m. I hear the engine roar the crunch of metal, and then bam, my mailbox is gone again. This time, though, I'm not fixing it. I'm building something. Something Rhonda Glass, the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA, won't see coming.
That's what you get.
She's been running my neighborhood like a dictator, tearing down anyone who dares challenge her. But today she's about to learn that some things don't break.
Rhonda.
I'm about to turn the tables, and the trap I'm setting will make sure she gets the surprise of a lifetime. What happens next is going to change everything. And trust me, you're not going to believe how it all unfolds. Rhonda Glass wasn't your typical HOA president. She didn't just enforce rules, she lived them like a walking, talking manifestation of suburban oppression. On the outside, she looked perfect blonde hair that never moved, a wardrobe that screamed control, and that damn gold HOA badge pinned to her blazer like she was the sheriff of Willowbrook Court. But underneath that flawless exterior, a woman who thrived on power and manipulation. Her first visit to my doorstep was a study in subtlety. She knocked all smiles and politeness, but there was something calculating in her eyes. "Oh, Caleb, what a terrible accident," she said, peering around me to see how much of my house was in view. Then came the questions, harmless on the surface. What was my work schedule? Did I have many visitors? Was I planning any renovations? It was clear she was gathering intel. And when I politely turned down her suggestion for coffee, her smile faltered just for a second before snapping back to its picture-perfect facade. That's when I realized it wasn't about the mailbox or the garden or even the rules. Rhonda wasn't interested in keeping Willowbrook Court beautiful. She wanted control, and I was the next person on her list to break. But what she didn't know was that she was about to meet someone who wasn't afraid to fight back. I'd always imagined my life in Willowbrook Court would be simple. After inheriting my grandparents' house, I moved in to get away from the grind, reclaiming a quiet space where I could focus on my work-building props and mechanical effects for Hollywood films. It was peaceful, the kind of place where everyone knew each other. The lawns were manicured just so, and the neighbors waved when they passed by. My grandparents had lived here for over 30 years, and every inch of the house was filled with memories. The smell of old wood and leather, the faint hum of distant traffic, and the calm that came with knowing this was the place that had sheltered them for so long. The first month was exactly what I wanted. I spent my days in the garage crafting elaborate designs that could blow up, catch fire, or collapse. Whatever the studios needed, I could make it happen. It was therapeutic. I had no complaints. Until Rhonda Glass came into my life like a storm ready to disrupt everything. It started innocuously enough with a knock on the door. Rhonda introduced herself with that smile, the one that didn't quite reach her eyes. She was just checking in to make sure I was settling in. Okay. Then came the subtle digs. How long had I lived in the neighborhood? Had I received the HOA regulations? And what did I think about the community's standards? The kind of questions that seemed innocent, but I soon realized were meant to pry into my life, to see where I fit in with her vision of the neighborhood. The first sign of trouble came on a Monday morning in early September. I woke up to the sound of metal scraping against concrete, just in time to see a black SUV tearing down the street, leaving behind a smashed mailbox. My mailbox. It wasn't much, just a minor inconvenience, I told myself. But when it happened again 2 weeks later, I started wondering if there was more to it. That's when Rhonda showed up. With her signature smile and clipboard, she claimed to sympathize with me, but I could sense it wasn't about the mailbox, it was about control. She asked invasive questions, trying to find out how much of a challenge I might be. I realized then Rhonda wasn't just the HOA president. She was a predator, and I was her next target. It started with subtle harassment, the kind that's hard to pin down but impossible to ignore. The first mailbox incident could have been an accident, I told myself. But then it happened again, and again. Each time the same black SUV, the same pattern, a slow approach, a deliberate swerve, and then bam, my mailbox smashed to pieces. The first time I replaced the mailbox with nothing more than a few trips to the hardware store. I thought it was a teenager, some random person who just didn't care. But then Rhonda showed up. She knocked on my door, gold HOA badge gleaming her perfectly styled hair, catching the sun like she was some kind of suburban queen. She wasn't here to apologize. She was here to investigate. "Oh, Caleb, how terrible," she cooed. But there was no real concern in her voice. She was more interested in where my mailbox was positioned, whether I'd had any strange visitors, and oddly, whether I planned to renovate the property. "We just want to make sure everything fits with the neighborhood standards," she added, that smile of hers never reaching her eyes. By then, I'd already started installing a camera by the mailbox to catch whoever was doing this. Rhonda noticed it right away, asking in the most innocent tone if I had permission from the HOA to install surveillance equipment. She didn't seem worried about my safety. She was worried about how my actions might affect her precious community. 2 weeks later, Rhonda's attention shifted from vague curiosity to outright control. She came by after the second mailbox incident. Her smile was gone, replaced by something colder. Her questions had turned sharper, more probing, and suddenly, she wasn't just asking about the mailbox anymore. She wanted to know about my work schedule. How often did I get deliveries? Were clients coming to my house? Why was I working from home? Her concern was clear. She didn't trust me, and she wanted to know how much of a threat I was to her idea of the perfect neighborhood. "You know," she said, flashing me that cold smile, "we do have rules about home-based businesses. You might need a permit for that." I hadn't even started the process of settling into my new life here when I was suddenly under a microscope. The more she poked around, the clearer it became. She wasn't just trying to help me fit in. She was trying to control me. The violation notices came shortly after. The second mailbox had barely been replaced before the HOA issued its first fine $75 for excessive noise. The crime: I'd been working in my garage building props for a film, and apparently the sound of power tools was too much for the peace of the community. I had followed every guideline, every specification. But Rhonda didn't care about fairness. She cared about power. By the third incident, I couldn't brush it off as a coincidence anymore. My mailbox had become a target, and Rhonda was behind it. This time, the SUV didn't just graze my mailbox, it obliterated it. The sound of the crash echoed through the neighborhood. I watched from my window as Rhonda's black SUV backed away from the wreckage, leaving a trail of twisted metal in its wake. This wasn't a random accident. It was deliberate. I had video footage of the car's approach, the exact moment it lined up with the mailbox and accelerated into it. And this time, I had something Rhonda couldn't deny: her license plate number. It matched the one parked outside her house, the biggest one on the block. This was personal. The mailbox was just the beginning. Rhonda had made her first real move against me. That night, I sat in my garage workshop, watching the footage and piecing everything together. It wasn't just the mailbox she was targeting. She was testing me, pushing me, trying to see how much I would take before I broke. I wasn't about to break. By the time the fourth incident occurred, I'd had enough. The third mailbox had barely been replaced when I got another violation notice from the HOA. This time, it was for a too-high grass measurement. The grass was 3.2 inches tall. The violation, 3 inches. I measured the grass myself. It was exactly the same height as my neighbor's. But Rhonda didn't care about fairness. She wasn't just looking for violations. She was looking for ways to crush me. The police were called next. Rhonda had filed a complaint claiming my mailbox was illegally placed, even though it had been there for 30 years. She even accused me of blocking the road with my car, which was parked legally in my driveway. The sheriff's department showed up, asked a few questions, and left. But I knew this wasn't over. It wasn't about the mailbox. It wasn't about the grass. It was about control. And Rhonda had just escalated things to a new level. By the time Rhonda crossed the line with my grandparents' garden, I realized what this was really about. It wasn't about rules or even the neighborhood. It was about her need for dominance. And this time, she wasn't just targeting my property, she was attacking my memories. The destruction of the garden was personal. Rhonda marched onto my property with Derek in tow, a clipboard in his shaking hands. She trampled through the roses my grandparents had carefully cultivated for 30 years. She destroyed the memorial stones my grandfather had placed to mark their wedding anniversaries. And she did it with the cold detachment of someone who had nothing to lose, a woman so obsessed with power that she didn't care what she destroyed in the process. This was the moment I knew I couldn't back down. Rhonda had done it to other families before, running them out of their homes with escalating fines and threats. But she'd made a huge mistake. She'd messed with someone who wasn't afraid to fight back. And that's exactly what I was going to do. The sun had barely begun to rise when I stood at my bedroom window, coffee and handphone recording in the other. The familiar sound of Rhonda's oversized SUV's engine rumbled in the distance, growing louder as it neared my property. 5:57 a.m. It was time. The trap was set. For the last few weeks, I had been meticulously preparing. The mailbox, disguised as a typical suburban installation, was anything but ordinary. Beneath its innocent exterior was a fortress of steel anchored in 4 feet of concrete and reinforced with the kind of precision that would survive even the harshest impacts. If Rhonda thought she could keep bullying me with her HOA rules, she was about to learn a painful lesson. From my vantage point, I watched her approach the same smug confidence in her driving as always. She didn't slow down. She didn't hesitate. At 5:58 a.m., right on cue, she lined up her SUV and slammed the accelerator just like she had dozens of times before. But this time, something was different. The sound of the collision was deafening like a thunderclap that shook the ground beneath me. Her SUV hit the mailbox with a force that should have flattened it, but instead, the mailbox stood firm, unmoved, untouched, the SUV. It crumpled around it like a paper cup caught in a storm. The front end of Rhonda's vehicle folded inward, the hood crumpling instantly, the airbags detonating, and the engine block driven back into the firewall, creating a grotesque heap of twisted metal. I could hardly believe what I was seeing. For a moment, the world seemed to freeze. Rhonda sat there, dazed, her hands gripping the steering wheel, her face hidden behind the airbags. She looked as if she'd just collided with a brick wall, and that's exactly what had happened. I slowly walked outside, still recording, savoring every moment of this sweet, poetic justice. As I stepped onto the lawn, I noticed Betty across the street, phone in hand, streaming the entire scene live to her followers. It wasn't just me who had been a victim of Rhonda's tyranny. Now the entire neighborhood would see the truth. The wreckage of Rhonda's SUV lay in the middle of the road, steam rising from the destroyed radiator. The once pristine mailbox, its surface gleaming in the early morning sunlight, stood like a monument to everything Rhonda had tried to tear down. She stumbled out of her vehicle disoriented and immediately started shouting. "What is this? This is illegal. You set me up." Her voice cracked with panic, and I could see the shock in her eyes as she tried to comprehend what had just happened. She couldn't process it. The force she had been using to destroy others had come back on her in a way she never expected. "Actually, Rhonda," I said, walking toward her with calm deliberation. "It's just really well built." I couldn't resist the irony. "I used proper engineering principles, you know. Standards." She stood there, frozen, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. The shattered windshield provided a perfect view of the immovable mailbox still standing proud and unscathed. I kept the camera rolling, capturing her meltdown for posterity. Behind me, Betty emerged from her house, her phone still streaming live. "Everyone stop recording," Rhonda screamed, her voice rising with desperation. "This is private property. You can't film me." But it was no use. The entire neighborhood was watching, and every phone had a front row seat to her humiliation. Derek, the nervous HOA vice president, arrived just as Rhonda was attempting to salvage some form of dignity. He took one look at the scene and immediately turned on his heel, walking in the opposite direction. He knew which way the wind was blowing now, and it wasn't in Rhonda's favor. Within moments, neighbors began appearing on their porches, phones raised, documenting the scene. It was clear this was Rhonda's downfall, and everyone was ready to watch her implode. "What the hell happened?" Rhonda stammered, her voice trembling, as she tried to make sense of the situation. She was surrounded by her own wreckage, and all she could do was blame everyone else for her predicament. "This is all a setup." I didn't even flinch. "It's not a setup, Rhonda. It's just called justice." By the time the emergency responders arrived, the video footage was already spreading like wildfire. The hashtag #Mailbox Revenge started trending in our area, and people who had suffered under Rhonda's rule began reaching out with their own stories. They were all sharing the same pain, the same terror that had come from living under her thumb. Now it was time for her to face the consequences. The sound of sirens filled the air as Rhonda's SUV was towed away. I stood there, my phone still recording, knowing that this was the moment I'd been waiting for. Rhonda Glass had finally met someone who wouldn't back down, and the entire neighborhood was watching. The morning after Rhonda's crash, the entire neighborhood was buzzing. News crews had arrived, and the air was thick with the sound of cameras and chatter. But it wasn't just about the accident. It was about everything that had come to light. Rhonda, once untouchable, was now a pariah. She spent the next few hours pacing around her house, making frantic calls to insurance companies, demanding that they cover the damage. But there was no escaping the truth. The footage was irrefutable, her deliberate destruction of my mailbox, her lies, her bullying. It was all there for the world to see. Neighbors who had once kept their heads down now came forward with their own stories. People who had suffered under Rhonda's reign of terror, families forced to move because of her fabricated violations, couples who had been fined for the most ridiculous reasons finally felt like they could speak out without fear of retaliation. It was a revelation for many, and the anger that had simmered quietly beneath the surface for years was bubbling to the top. Betty, the one person who had stood by me from the beginning, was now a local hero. Her live stream had captured everything: Rhonda's meltdown, the wreckage of her SUV, the neighborhood's collective response. It was more than just a viral video. It was a symbol of the community fighting back. In just a few hours, the hashtag #MailboxRevenge was trending, and stories of Rhonda's abuse of power were spreading like wildfire. News stations were reaching out for interviews, asking for my side of the story. By that afternoon, the HOA called an emergency meeting. For the first time in years, there was a line out the door of the community center, full of people eager to speak out about the injustices Rhonda had caused. The walls that had kept the community divided were coming down, and the voices that had been silenced for so long were finally being heard. I sat in the back watching as one after another residents stood up to share their experiences. The Williams family told their story about Rhonda's attack over a slightly mispainted mailbox. The Martinez family spoke about the oak tree that Rhonda had ordered them to remove because it supposedly violated sightline regulations. Even the Johnsons, whose twin toddlers had been harassed over noise complaints, stood up to tell their tale. Rhonda had torn families apart, one ridiculous violation at a time, and now everyone knew. Then it was Betty's turn. She was holding a thick folder filled with violation notices, evidence, and photos she'd taken over the years. "I've been keeping records on Rhonda for 2 years," she said, her voice steady and strong. "Every fine, every lie, every family she's run out of this neighborhood, it's time for her to answer for it." Rhonda was absent from the meeting, of course. She didn't have the guts to face the people she'd tormented for so long. But her absence didn't matter. The damage had been done, and the truth was out. There was no going back. A vote was called, a vote of no confidence. It passed unanimously. Rhonda's reign of terror was officially over. She was removed from all HOA positions, stripped of her power. Derek, her nervous sidekick, was nowhere to be found. It was clear he had no interest in standing by someone who had lost all credibility. Within hours, he resigned from the HOA, citing philosophical differences and his new focus on a city council campaign. In truth, he was running away from the wreckage of Rhonda's empire, eager to disassociate himself from her downfall. But the best part, Betty was voted in as the new HOA president. Her first act was to revoke every violation Rhonda had issued in the past 2 years, wiping away the mountains of fines that had plagued so many families. She also established an appeals process, giving residents a voice they'd never had before. The transformation was immediate. The energy in the neighborhood shifted. The next week, a block party was organized, a community event that hadn't happened in years. People were laughing, sharing stories, and for the first time in a long while, Willowbrook Court felt like a real neighborhood again. As for Rhonda, her life fell apart in a way she never imagined. Her house went on the market within a month. Without the HOA presidency to give her status, she became a social pariah, her former allies distancing themselves. Neighbors crossed the street to avoid her, and even the local grocery store had banned her after a screaming incident with teenage employees. Her world crumbled piece by piece, and the very power she'd wielded with such arrogance had been ripped away in a matter of days. And as for me, well, I stood in the garden that my grandparents had so lovingly tended, watching the roses bloom once again. The wreckage of Rhonda's SUV was a distant memory, and what was left was the beauty of resilience. My mailbox, the one Rhonda had tried to destroy so many times, stood proudly at the end of the driveway, a symbol of everything we had fought for. The neighborhood had changed. Willowbrook Court had reclaimed its soul, and it wasn't just about winning a battle against a tyrant. It was about standing up for what's right, even when the odds seem insurmountable. I still get the occasional call about defensive landscaping or anti-Karen infrastructure. Apparently, my little mailbox incident has inspired others to fight back against HOA bullies. It feels good knowing that the story has helped spark a movement, even if I never intended for it to go that far. But the best part: when a young family with 2 small kids knocked on my door asking about the infamous mailbox, I knew things had truly changed. They'd moved into Rhonda's old house, and they wanted to meet the guy who had stood up for the neighborhood. The sound of laughter echoed through Willowbrook Court that evening as the kids played around the fortress mailbox. And for the first time since I moved here, I finally felt like I belonged.